The first words we hear from Bucky to Steve are,
"Sometimes I think you like getting punched."
After saving him from another fight in an alleyway. Therefore, immediately we understand that Bucky is Steve's guardian angel, a big brother rooted in an opposites attract kind of relationship. One man is small but is deeply committed to his personal convictions, and another is a big guy who is committed to his friend because he represents home, the world of the familiar. The value of their relationship is not just the contents of their friendship, but is the context that it offers.
I knew him.
Because they set a high standard for each other in terms of who they are and who they should be, which is symbolized by the night they spend together with their dates in the Stark Expo.
Factory, Bucky, come on, there are men laying down their lives. I got no right to do any less than them. That's what you don't understand. This isn't about me.
Right. Because you got nothing to prove.
Steve wants to fight because in his eyes, it's a responsibility that is to be expected. While for Bucky, he wants to fight because he wants to protect people like Steve. They identify with each other differently, but that's precisely why they're important to each other. Their connection allows them to know where they are and what their purpose is in the world. So the purpose of this essay is to examine this friendship and see how it functions as a storytelling tool.
She's gotta be 100 years old right now.
So are we, pal.
You don't have one of those, do you?
After Steve meets Erskine, gets bullied in the army, falls in love with Peggy, goes through Project Rebirth, mourns the death of Erskine, and then becomes a massive cultural propaganda tool for the military, what snaps him out of his self-indulgent daydream is Bucky.
Crowds I'm used to are usually more, 12.
Your audience contained what was left of the 107th.
The 107?
He then goes out to save him and proves himself to be more than just a dancing monkey but a hero and a natural leader. Subsequently, this establishes that the value of Bucky is built on a humble loyalty to the virtues of the past. In the bar scene, Bucky even points this out. He tells our hero that he's not following the grandiosity of Captain America but the idealistic eagerness of Steve Rogers.
You ready to follow Captain America into the jaws of death?
Hell no. That little guy from Brooklyn, I was too dumb not to run away from a fight. I'm following him.
Because that continuity that all started with some foolishness in an alleyway is the expectation they offer each other. In other words, the ability to sustain a small scope in such a big scale is what makes their relationship so important. There's even a moment where Bucky is looking out for Steve with a sniper rifle and shoots a Hydra soldier, and that's his role in Steve's life. The friend who's always around and looks out for him by simply looking at the same life with a slightly different angle.
I thought you were dead.
I thought you were smaller.
But tragedy strikes. Bucky dies, or it seems so, during a routine mission, and it's all because Bucky, for a split second, tried to be like Steve. And there's two sides to the cause of this death. This is Steve's fault for not taking up his role as Bucky's protector, instead treating him like an equal was actually really irresponsible of him.
I had him on the ropes.
I know you did.
This perspective can be understood as one of the motivations to why Steve is so committed to looking after Bucky in later appearances.
It wasn't your fault.
Did you read the report?
Yes,
Then you know that's not true.
you did everything you could.
But it can also be understood as being the result of Bucky's growing disenchantment with his own identity.
I'm turning into you. This is like a horrible dream.
Don't take it so hard. Maybe she's got a friend.
He has an implicit difficulty in knowing who he is in relations to Steve now. Because although Captain America is humble enough to still look up to Bucky, Bucky's own role as Steve's guardian angel is made irrelevant. He's not protecting home, instead he's barely keeping up with it. So what begins his identity as the Winter Soldier starts from a reaction, in a loss of his connection with the familiar, and then a failed attempt to reach for it. quickly this theme of disenchantment is developed into becoming the central concept entering into Winter Soldier. Steve is a man out of time and has two connections in the present. Sam, who represents Steve's connection with American culture and people.
Marvin Gaye, 1972 Trouble Man soundtrack. Everything you missed, jammed into one album.
I'll put it on the list.
And Natasha, who represents Steve's professional relationship with the flag and his identity as a soldier.
Our mission is to rescue hostages.
No, that's your mission. And you've done it beautifully.
His identity is composed by these two offerings. Steve can either express himself through his personal convictions or by his acts of service. But then Bucky reappears as the Winter Soldier. He's a perversion of Steve's story. Like him, he was an ordinary man made super soldier, but this time it was not voluntary. As Captain America, he was a bold cultural symbol whose actions were transparent and honest, while the historical influence of the Winter Soldier comes from its secrecy and manipulation. And like Steve, his longevity comes from being frozen. But now these two parallel lines of meaning is about to meet. Both Captain America and the Winter Soldier serve Hydra unknowingly, and if Steve maintains his current direction, he will lose his identity like Bucky did. Therefore, Bucky's role as the Winter Soldier is used to offer a third connection, because once again he serves as a continuity for both the character and the themes. The cultural identity and the professional identity that Sam and Nat offer is fluid and ever-changing because they are connected to the present.
Not staying here.
I blew all my covers. I gotta go figure out a new one.
While Bucky stretches even further than that, he offers context that doesn't just reflect who Steve could be, but who he is. Deep down inside, beyond his cultural and professional worth, is a boy who had a friend who set a high standard for kindness, all encapsulated by the flashback where Bucky says,
I'm with you to the end of the line, pal.
which is what Steve repeats when his face is being turned into mashed potatoes.
Because I'm with you to the end of the line.
Winter Soldier is a story about Steve's perseverance, his capacity to hold on to his sense of identity in the advent of living in change, and for Bucky, it's an expansion of his loss. He first lost his role as a big brother, and now he loses his memories and identity as a man. In both cases, this is their dark second act, where they depart the familiar world and is now scarred by the unknown. Forced to change, but simply seeing each other allows them to know what to keep. Bucky's previous appearances functioned as a symbolic marker for different epochs. No matter who Steve becomes, Bucky is home. Despite losing his mother, he's there for Steve. Despite becoming a celebrity, he's there to ground Steve. Despite losing some of his faith and purpose, Steve finds Bucky again. And now, despite losing Peggy, he's there to give Steve a connection with home. Even when half of these events weren't his choice, fate keeps pulling them back together.
You pulled me from the river. Why? I don't know. Yes, you do.
And in Civil War, Bucky continues to be a victim because Zemo exploits him as a fall guy to create a political divide within the Avengers. So the writers effectively have one of two directions to take this new epoch, and thus very much determine the ending of Steve's story, because Civil War is basically the turning point that decides what the central theme of Steve's journey is. Tony represents the modern, and Bucky represents the past. Either Cap's arc is about a man appreciating his new place in the world, which would require the climax to have Bucky go nuts, presumably because of Zemo, and then have him beat Tony to near death and force Steve to pick Tony over Bucky. This would, in turn, change Steve's ending in Endgame, where he would be more likely to have ended up with Sharon.
Things aren't so bad.
Or the second option, which would have Iron Man go nuts and want to kill Bucky, so Steve has to pick him over Tony. This in turn offers a different arc where Steve's journey is once again focused on the theme of perseverance, where his refusal to change is a heroic act because the emphasis is on protecting one's core identity and personal values, and thus thematically demands Steve to return home once the story is over. In other words, Bucky's role in Civil War is used to determine if Steve's life is about letting the past go or standing up for himself. And shockingly, Marvel Studios picked the second option, to the extent that Steve echoes his old words from the first Avenger.
I could do this all day.
Captain America refuses to surrender, because if he doesn't look after Bucky, no one else will. The world abused the Winter Soldier by taking away his identity. So, as a response, Steve trades his. He drops his shield, shedding his cultural and professional identity, and this continues the established theme from the first meeting, all those years ago. The value of their relationship is in the context that they offer each other, because interpersonally, they set a high standard for who they are and who they should be.
What's gonna happen to your friends?
Whatever it is, I'll deal with it.
I don't know if I'm worth all this, Steve.
What you did all those years, it wasn't you. You didn't have a choice.
I know. But I did it.
Steve and Bucky in Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame fits together to tell a story about the perseverance of kindness in the face of a world that says it's irrelevant. Because in Civil War, Steve gets to save Bucky finally. Then in Infinity War, Steve is rewarded by a liberated Bucky and gets to fight side by side with him like in old times. He loses him once again, something that shocks him, but entering into Endgame, Steve isn't mourning. The act of perseverance has rewarded him not just with more precious moments with his friend, but a resilience to trauma.
Gotta move on.
And that's a lesson that Steve tries to instill into Natasha. By refusing to let go of his home, Steve has earned a sense of direction that can't ever be taken away.
Maybe I'll try some of that life Tony was telling me to get.
Which is why he's then rewarded at the end when he gets to be with Peggy again. Everything goes back to the first words we hear from Bucky to Steve.
Sometimes I think you like getting punched.
Their relationship is framed on the theme of recognition because they empowered each other by offering a different perspective that widened the greater context of their lives.
Don't do anything stupid till I get back. How can I? You're taking all this stupid with you.
Be it reminding each other of their humble beginnings to making sure the other person doesn't feel alone, to Bucky giving Sam a nod to go and talk to Steve because he knows exactly what's about to happen. Bucky's purpose is to operate like a thematic checkpoint system. He first represented who Steve wanted to be, then as a reminder of what the world wasn't anymore. Then he symbolically functioned as the part of Steve that has to be protected. But then Bucky ultimately becomes the person Steve has to leave behind. It's a friendship built on offering each other stability in shifting sands. And as a result, we as the audience gets a closer relationship with Steve's sense of self. Every appearance of Bucky, we realize we have a Steve that's just a little bit different. And these differences accumulate so much that in the end, both men are okay with the prospect of saying goodbye. My voice is killing me.